we ought to stop thinking of, in some respects, there being a real distinction between the administrative state writ large, and in this case, when it comes to particularly these strategically significant areas of communication or tech infrastructure with the national security agencies, that there's very little distinction and red lines drawn between the big tech companies themselves, the national security state, and then, of course, the national security state's stenographers in the legacy media companies. And all of these elements are brought together when it comes to the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story, but it cuts across a whole slew of issues. And if there's one thing that the Twitter files have exposed that I think is more significant and, quite frankly, disturbing than any other, it's that there was censorship and suppression by proxy here, First Amendment violations by proxy, where you had the national security apparatus clearly coordinating with Twitter and, by the way, other platforms as well, including Facebook for that matter, when it came to censoring and suppressing a whole slew of content across a wide variety of areas. And of course, we know this with respect to the Chinese coronavirus. We know this with respect to election integrity in the post-2020 election period, but it also happened prior to that period. And what I raise in this piece, as you mentioned, is the idea that personnel is policy here. And in the form of a Jim Baker, for example, you have the personification of this lack of distinction, this blurring of lines between the security state and big tech, because you have someone who was the FBI general counsel during the heat of Russiagate, during some of its most important frauds foisted on us by our national security apparatus. And then he finds himself as the deputy general counsel within Twitter calling the shots on suppressing the Hunter Biden story. So on the one hand, effectively running an information operation and worse against President Trump while inside the deep state, and then running an information operation also against Trump and protective of Biden outside of the deep state on the putatively private sector side. And that's one individual among many. And when it comes to the Hunter Biden story, one story among a whole slew of them where we've seen reportage in recent months of this coordination between the deep state and big tech.
Yeah, what's so incredible is, I mean, seriously, the top lawyer at the FBI then becomes the deputy top lawyer at Twitter. Just, it couldn't be more transparent or brazen. But what's unbelievable to me is that he survived Elon Musk's takeover. And when Elon Musk started airing out the dirty laundry in what are being dubbed the Twitter files, giving internal Twitter documents to, I would say, ideologically neutral or even left-leaning reporters like Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss, who certainly could not be called right-wing. James Baker was still there. He was vetting what was given to the. So even when Elon Musk said we're going to audit ourselves, we're going to air it all out, James Baker was still inside Twitter. Only he was deciding what would be aired out. He was later sacked, but it's incredible to me that he was still a stowaway in Elon Musk's Twitter. But he's not alone. I'm reading your article here in the New York Post. Jeff Carlton, an intelligence analyst for the CIA and FBI. That's what this was. I mean, I think the real economic value of Twitter was not the ads it would sell or things like that. It was exactly what you say. It was an information asset. It's what the CIA always dreamed about. Not only did they collect everything that people look at, but everything they chat about in their internal direct messages. And then finally, what they would push out as propaganda, what they would choose would be a trending story, or what they would throttle so it never could trend. You mentioned other tech companies. I mean, of course, Twitter is the one we're focused on right now because of Elon Musk's takeover of it. But Andy Stone, the communications director for Facebook, used to be a Democrat flack, obviously. Jay Carney, who was well known as Barack Obama's communications director, went over to Amazon, no problem, just slide right in there. We learned that Anthony Fauci's daughter was at Twitter, no problem. Like it's not even a revolving door, because that says there's a door. There's just no door. This is a adjacent hotel room that the door is taken off the hinges. They just go back and forth.
I think what's most dangerous about this doorless relationship between these putatively separate sectors, the public and the private sector, is that here you have collusion, coordination, what I would call a conspiracy to violate our first freedom, the First Amendment, and particularly on political speech, which the First Amendment expressly is focused on, at least as the courts have arbitrated over it. And here you have suppression of that speech on which every other liberty ultimately relies. And as you note, there is this easy, frictionless relationship between Washington, D.C. and Silicon Valley. And I think Silicon Valley would probably get there anyway were Democratic Party made men and women not able to slip right through the front door effortlessly into these various functions. But I think what's perhaps most disturbing about it is, as happens in tyrannies, it's always on the basis of national security or public health and safety that these rampant violations of our rights are justified. Obviously, we saw that with the coronavirus. We also see this with election integrity. It's really important to note, and this is one of the more chilling lines I've come across in this burgeoning war on wrongthink that the national security state has served as the tip of the spear of. CISA, which is an agency within the Department of Homeland Security, which is focused on securing critical infrastructure, including election infrastructure. The head of CISA, the director of CISA, has said that perhaps the most important infrastructure of all is our, and I'm quoting directly here, cognitive infrastructure. So think about what that implies. If it's the job of a DHS sub-agency to protect cognitive infrastructure, and as she sees it and as she has articulated, that implies an obligation of the government to counter quote-unquote mis, dis, and malinformation. That is to run roughshod over the First Amendment. And CISA is one of the agencies that was in the room during these regular meetings that we now know about between big tech and the various national security agencies as well. And CISA also played a substantial role in this election integrity partnership apparatus that we've learned about through the likes of progressive publications, by the way, like The Intercept, who have shown that the national security state was filtering through these requests to censor and suppress information and accounts via this third-party cutout, which referred these requests onto the big tech companies and allowed them to violate the First Amendment, again, by proxy. So there's the personnel as policy issue here. There is the seamless ties between the deep state and big tech. And then there's the pernicious way that they're justifying these massive violations, which ultimately undermine every single other liberty that we cherish so deeply in America, or at least that we used to.
That's an excerpt from my show every night. It's called The Ezra Levant Show. That's me, Ezra Levant. You can see the whole thing behind our paywall. Well, there's a lot of goodies behind there. I do a show every weeknight. My friends Sheila Gunn Reid and David Menzies and Nat and Kat have their shows too. You get a ton of content for just $8 a month. There's so much in there you won't find anywhere else. Go to rebelnewsplus.com.